Well, for more on the push for China's market, we're joined by China expert Patrick Murphy. He's a professor at DePaul University and specializes in business. Welcome, Patrick.
Thanks for having me.
So, Patrick, we're seeing several brands trying to get in on the action, especially for Chinese New Year. How important is targeting the Asian market, specifically China, when it comes to profitability?
I think targeting the Asian market, and China in particular, is a little bit different than what a lot of Western companies are used to. You have to lead with the culture. And what this means for a lot of our Western brands who try to be global companies is that you have to localize your offerings in ways that you may not have thought of before. For example, Kentucky Fried Chicken in China offers porridge, which is hard to make at home. It's very popular amongst the Chinese families, but you would never see that in most of the Western KFCs. So there's a lot of that kind of activity going on.
So definitely people have to be cognizant of the local community. Now, what are some other examples of companies who are using the holiday, perhaps, to woo new consumers?
Well, there's quite a bit. I mean, the big one that a lot of my colleagues and I are very inspired by would be Pepsi, who used the famous actor from the 1980s television series, the remake of the famous story Journey to the West, COG, as a spokesperson. And in the Year of the Monkey, of course, the famous character from that story is Sun Wukong, and that's that was a hit. But we also have Dior making monkey-themed facial powder, Piaget making a monkey watch. We have these kind of things that are kind of hit or miss. So localization is hard, especially when you have a culture as complex as that of China's.
Now, with any country with anyone who's trying to enter a new market, there's a lot of trial and error. You mentioned some of the brands that are getting it right. What about the cautionary tales of companies who got it wrong when it came to marketing to Chinese consumers?
Well, it's not all bad, because with the rise of technology, especially social media in China, whenever you have a story like that, it really generates a lot of conversation and a lot of buzz around the brand. So whereas people may be saying things like the Piaget watch is too ugly to wear, that does still mean that a lot of people are talking about the brand and doing these sorts of things. And the good thing about Chinese New Year, even though it's very much like, say, Christmas in the West, it changes every year qualitatively. So there's a different animal. So as it's the monkey right now, you have the rooster next year, and then so on and so forth. So there's a lot of different chances you can take to try to get into the Chinese market.
So even if someone falls short, they could still perhaps try again next year. Now, what about these efforts when it comes to comparing it to other holidays, like perhaps Christmas or Singles' Day?
Christmas and Singles' Day are a little bit different because they're, by and large, the same every year. You have the November 11th Singles' Day phenomenon where the vendors in the stores were trying to go after people who had not yet found themselves in a relationship. And of course, with Christmas, you have Santa and deers and trees pretty much every year. But it's more of a regular kind of process that you can lock into your corporate strategy, and you can revitalize it year in and year out. But with a 12-year cycle with the Chinese animals as they go through, and even over time, those change with the underlying elements. There's a lot of things that come to create.
And as you mentioned, corporate strategy. For some of these Western brands that are really trying to appeal to this market, what do you think are some of the biggest hurdles?
The way that Western companies typically think about strategy is to look at the standard elements of customers, competitors, distributors, suppliers, and they really take a traditional view of the market. That's actually starting off with the wrong foot when it comes to a nation like China. It's much better to look at the culture, and whereas corporate strategy does involve thinking about culture, that's part of another element of the environment. It tends to change more slowly, it tends to be more complex,
right.
But that's actually what you want to start with when you think about China, because it is what we would call a strong culture. The values are shared strongly across people.
And Patrick, just quickly as we wrap up here, in terms of expectations going forward, do you expect more firms to beef up their presence in China?
Oh, there's no question. I mean, when you have a population that's 4 times the size of the American population, and it's changing so quickly. I mean, look, this nation really just started opening up to foreign brands in the early 90s, and it's still doing so. There's a lot of untapped opportunities and a lot of change, and that's very attractive to Western companies.
Well, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us, Patrick Murphy.